Robert Oppenheimer in 22 minutes. Welcome back to the channel, friends. If you love diving into the fascinating tales of influential figures in history, you are in for a treat today. And if you're new here, do hit the like button and subscribe for more riveting stories from the past. Today, we unfold the life of a man whose genius illuminated the darkest corners of science. Julius Robert Oppenheimer. Let's time travel back to the 22nd of April 1904. On this day, a star was born in New York City in the guise of Julius Robert Oppenheimer, who we fondly remember today as Robert Oppenheimer. Born into a prosperous Jewish family, Robert was the son of Julius Oppenheimer, a German immigrant who left Europe in 1888 amidst increasing anti-Semitism. Despite arriving penniless, he prospered, rising to a prominent position in one of Manhattan's leading textile firms by the time of Robert's birth. Robert's mother, Ella Friedman, also of Jewish lineage, was a New York native and a painter who significantly influenced Robert's perceptions of existence and the universe. Raised amid luxury and opulence, with original works by Van Gogh and Picasso adorning his home, Robert received the best education, attending top institutions like the Ethical Culture School and Alcuin Preparatory School. A gifted child, his early interests lay in mineralogy, an interest he inherited from his German grandfather. His knack for learning saw him blazing through school, completing his education ahead of his peers. Robert's fascination with the sciences grew, initially inclining towards chemistry before eventually surrendering to the allure of physics. In 1922, at the ripe age of 18, he enrolled at Harvard University, intending to study chemistry but soon transitioning to physics. The teachings of Professor Percy Bridgman, a renowned experimental physicist, left a lasting imprint on young Robert. Even as he delved deep into the sciences, Oppenheimer nurtured a love for history, Greek and Latin classics, demonstrating an appetite for learning that was truly eclectic. His Harvard years were marked by voracious reading, attending extra classes, and excelling academically, resulting in him graduating summa cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts in just 3 years. Before his graduation, Cambridge University in England had already welcomed Robert to continue his studies. Here, the teachings of Lord Ernest Rutherford, a titan in the field of nuclear physics, left an indelible mark on his scientific pursuits. The climax of his academic journey unfolded in Germany, at the University of Göttingen, where he earned his PhD in physics in a record time of less than a year, impressing a Nobel laureate, James Franck, with his brilliance. His contribution to science crystallized when he co-authored a paper on the quantum theory of molecules in 1927, outlining the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, which revolutionized our understanding of molecular dynamics. This work laid the foundation for Oppenheimer's future contributions, most notably during the Manhattan Project, where his expertise would leave an indelible mark on the world. In essence, Robert Oppenheimer and his colleagues' breakthrough was that atomic nuclei are generally static, while the lightweight electrons are more susceptible to wave functions, thus are more dynamic. This was due to Oppenheimer's unique blend of interests in both chemistry and physics, a combination that enabled this impactful theory utilizing quantum chemistry and molecular physics. From the late 1920s, their approximation provided scientists the means to differentiate between the motion of a nucleus and an electron. Beyond Oppenheimer's remarkable scientific accomplishments, he was an individual of complex personality, often shifting between being a withdrawn scientist to a congenial individual as circumstances required. Oppenheimer was notorious for being encased in a haze of smoke due to his perpetual chain smoking habit, which eventually led to his premature death. Those who interacted with him at Harvard, Cambridge, and Göttingen remembered him as a peculiar blend of brilliance and innocence, sometimes making questionable decisions. His intellect occasionally clouded by arrogance, he was nevertheless generous with his knowledge, sharing it with his students and colleagues. A significant feature of his persona was his fascination with Eastern philosophy and mysticism. Deeply interested in Hinduism and Confucianism, he even learned Sanskrit, the sacred language of Hinduism, to read the faith's ancient texts in their original form. For him, the study of physics was not solely a quest for empirical data, but also a doorway into understanding the mystical nature of the universe. However, his academic journey was not without controversy. At Harvard, his behavior was sometimes questioned. While at Cambridge, He was accused of leaving an apple laced with harmful chemicals in his tutor's office, an act that nearly resulted in his suspension. A friend from the 1920s even claimed that Oppenheimer once attacked him out of jealousy. Oppenheimer's mercurial nature could be attributed to his experience as a German Jewish immigrant son during a time of widespread anti-Semitism. As an outsider, he battled frequent bouts of depression, making him a somewhat enigmatic figure. After completing his studies, Oppenheimer returned to the United States and took on fellowships at Harvard and Caltech. During his stay in Leiden, Netherlands, he acquired the nickname Oppi. By 1929, he had settled in America, accepting associate professor positions in physics at both the University of California, Berkeley, and Caltech. Between 1929 and 1942, Oppenheimer split his time between the two institutions. His teaching methods were renowned within the American physics community, and many mid-20th century physicists trained under his guidance at the School of Theoretical Physics he founded. Despite his impressive academic contributions, Oppenheimer remained distant from the world's events, learning about the Wall Street crash of 1929 months after its occurrence. One of Oppenheimer's significant contributions was in 1930, when he wrote a paper predicting the existence of the positron, an antiparticle of the electron. Furthermore, in 1935, together with one of his first female doctoral students, Melba Phillips, they proposed the Oppenheimer-Phillips process. This theory explained a specific type of deuteron-induced nuclear reaction, marking a giant leap in understanding atomic interactions. They proved that elements could turn radioactive when bombarded by deuterons. Their pioneering work paved the way for nuclear interactions at lower energy levels than previously known, making California a world-renowned hub for theoretical physics in the mid-20th century. Throughout these breakthroughs, Oppenheimer was battling personal chaos. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis in the late 1920s, leading him to find refuge in the dry desert air of Arizona and New Mexico. He later bought a ranch in New Mexico. Romantically, Oppenheimer led a turbulent life. In the mid-1930s, he fell for John Tatlock, the troubled daughter of a respected Old English scholar, John Strong Tatlock. Even after his relationship with Kitty Harrison, a physicist at Caltech, began, he continued seeing Tatlock until 1940. After marrying Kitty in November 1940, they had 2 children, Peter and Catherine. There remains some uncertainty about whether Oppenheimer continued seeing Tatlock, who tragically took her own life in 1944. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 disrupted Oppenheimer's life, as it did for many worldwide. The rise of the Nazis in Germany led to anti-Jewish policies, and Oppenheimer, a non-observant Jew, found himself donating part of his salary to help Jewish refugees fleeing Germany. Despite the escalating conflict in Europe, America remained officially neutral until the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, which marked the United States' entry into the war. The war redefined Oppenheimer's place in history as he became central to America's research efforts. At this time, Nazi Germany was trying to develop a nuclear weapon, leveraging their scientific expertise. Aided by the discovery of nuclear fission by Otto Robert Frisch and Leesmater in 1938, the Nazis initiated various experiments in this direction. In response, the United States launched the Manhattan Project in 1942, a research program aimed at developing their own nuclear bomb. Oppenheimer was placed in charge of the Los Alamos laboratory, marking a pivotal point in his life and history. Originating from a team first convened in 1942 on Manhattan Island, the Manhattan Project grew to employ roughly 130,000 people nationwide. Diverse teams operated across the United States and Europe, each addressing different aspects of the project. In Chicago, a group including Oppenheimer's former colleague Enrico Fermi developed the first functioning nuclear reactor. Another team in Washington State, the Hanford site, focused on producing plutonium for future nuclear weapons. At the heart of the Manhattan Project was Robert Oppenheimer, who supervised the critical research at the Los Alamos laboratory in New Mexico. Initially, Major General Leslie Groves, who oversaw the Manhattan Project, was hesitant to appoint Oppenheimer due to his lack of a Nobel Prize. However, Oppenheimer's knack for eliciting top performances from his team won Groves over. As the Los Alamos director, Oppenheimer sought a secluded location to ensure secrecy and facilitate nuclear testing. His choice was Los Alamos, New Mexico, where a research facility was built. There, he gathered over 5,000 of the finest scientists and experts of his time, including John Haysbrook Van Vleck, Robert Serber, Hans Bether, and Edward Teller. Despite their collective genius, the team faced a monumental task: producing a nuclear chain reaction based on theoretical knowledge alone. They weren't just building a nuclear weapon. They were attempting to predict the consequences of a nuclear explosion. Oppenheimer was deeply involved in every facet of the project. His intense commitment took a toll on his health, resulting in significant weight loss. In 1943, the team began working on a prototype named Tin Man Sea plutonium gun-type weapon. Despite their efforts, the complexities in design and logistics ultimately led to the abandonment of the Thin Man design in 1944. Its intended speed of detonation would have required a gun barrel too large for transportation on a B-29 Flying Superfortress, the bomber intended to carry the nuclear weapon. In April 1944, the complex Heinemann plutonium-based design was scrapped. Subsequently, Robert Oppenheimer reassigned his scientists and engineers to a simpler gun-type fission bomb project named Little Boy, this time utilizing uranium-235. Simultaneously, another design, Fat Man, an implosion-type bomb using plutonium, was in progress under physicist Seth Neddermeyer. Despite Fat Man's progression, Oppenheimer remained partial to the gun-type design. Oppenheimer's knack for leadership was evident in his decision to recruit Hungarian-born physicist and mathematician John von Neumann to review the designs in 1943. Von Neumann recommended a spherical design for the bomb, which would require less plutonium and make the assembly process more practical. Overcoming challenges of casting plutonium into a sphere using a plutonium-gallium alloy, Oppenheimer's teams were close to completing the Little Boy and Fat Man designs by the dawn of 1945. Throughout 1944 and 1945, they addressed various technical issues such as the bomb's descent when dropped from a height. By midsummer 1945, Oppenheimer announced to Major General Leslie Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, the test detonation was ready to proceed. The Trinity nuclear test took place on July 16, 1945, in the Jornada del Muerto Desert, New Mexico. Oppenheimer named the test Trinity, inspired by John Donne's 17th century religious poetry. The bomb used for the test, a Fat Man model, was aptly named Gadget. The test was performed near dawn. At 5:29 a.m., the gadget exploded, releasing energy equivalent to 25,000 tonnes of TNT, creating a crater a third of a kilometer wide and turning the surrounding sand into green glass-like rock. Observers were left in awe as a fiery mushroom cloud spiraled 12 kilometers into the sky. Despite popular belief, Oppenheimer did not quote the Bhagavad Gita during the explosion. Though his supposed words "I am become death," the destroyer of worlds have since become infamous. The Trinity test was a monumental event, marking the successful culmination of immense effort and engineering. Reflecting on the explosive success of the Manhattan Project 2 decades later, Robert Oppenheimer, the project's lead, confessed he was reminded of a line from the Bhagavad Gita. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the Mighty One, while the myth perpetuates that he declared, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Those words never actually passed his lips. In that moment of triumph, as the first atomic bomb exploded, Oppenheimer, along with his colleagues, felt a sense of jubilation. Yet, the ominous weight of their achievement soon became clear. Merely weeks after the Trinity test explosion, their creation was used as a war weapon. The atomic bomb, their chilling masterpiece, was deployed on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. That evening, Oppenheimer was both triumphant and remorseful, lamenting that the weapon hadn't been available for use against the Nazis. However, when a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki 3 days later, jubilation gave way to disillusionment. They hadn't given the Japanese enough time to process the horror of Hiroshima, nor to consider surrender. The decision to drop a second bomb remains controversial. Many agree with Oppenheimer and his colleagues that the Hiroshima bombing was arguably justifiable to end the war quickly and avoid an invasion of Japan, but view the Nagasaki bombing as needless. These remain the only 2 instances of nuclear warfare in history. Ironically, while nuclear weaponry poses an existential threat, it also established a nuclear peace as nations understood the catastrophic consequences of nuclear war. Mutually assured destruction. Post-war, Oppenheimer's stature was at its zenith in American academic circles. He left Berkeley to take up a directorship at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton in 1947. making it a hub for budding physicists and a leading center for physics study in the US. Oppenheimer's post-war influence extended beyond academia. As a member of the newly established Atomic Energy Commission, he held a key role in regulating nuclear proliferation, despite his attempts to prevent a nuclear arms race between the US and Soviet Union. His efforts were in vain. The Soviets successfully tested a nuclear weapon in 1949, escalating the tension of the nascent Cold War. Robert Oppenheimer, along with numerous scientists who contributed to the Los Alamos laboratory from 1942 to 1945, resisted the development of thermonuclear weapons. They cautioned against the immense harm and potential for a cataclysmic nuclear war such a weapon would cause. In a 1949 petition to the government, they argued that the potential threat to humanity far exceeded any military benefit. However, Truman moved forward, approving the program in January 1950. And by November 1952, the first hydrogen bomb, Ivy Mike, was detonated, boasting a destructive power 450 times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. Despite Oppenheimer's vital role in the Manhattan Project and his years as a senior government scientist, he soon found himself at odds with the government during the Second Red Scare in the early 1950s. This was a time of escalating Cold War tensions, heightened by the division of Germany, the formation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and the Korean War. Initially legitimate concerns about communist infiltration within the United States morphed into intense, often baseless paranoia about socialist politics and associated groups, including the American Civil Liberties Union. Oppenheimer had been involved with socialist and left-wing political movements and civil liberties organizations since the mid-1930s, a time when socialism appeared as a counterforce to the rising tide of fascism in Europe. While he never officially joined the Communist Party of the United States, many of his close associates, including his wife Kitty and his brother Frank, were members. Oppenheimer's involvement with these organizations, combined with his German-born father's heritage, raised suspicions among authorities, leading to him being surveilled even while serving as a top figure in the Manhattan Project. He was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1949 about his political ties. Although he admitted to connections with the Communist Party, he denied personal membership. In 1953, amid growing Red Scare paranoia, Oppenheimer's government security clearance was revoked under suspicions of being a Soviet spy, leading to a closed-door hearing in 1954. His reputation was significantly tarnished by former colleague Edward Teller's testimony questioning Oppenheimer's behavior during his tenure as the director of the Los Alamos laboratory. In the wake of perceived treachery, Robert Oppenheimer found himself without security clearance, banished to a socio-political wilderness in the mid-1950s. The aftermath of his security hearing and the revocation was particularly challenging for him. His standing in the academic community was divided. While many colleagues stood by him, university administrators often demonstrated less support, cancelling lectures and appearances he was due to make. Despite these setbacks, Oppenheimer, whose confidence was significantly shaken, withdrew from public initiatives, including those launched by figures like Einstein to caution the government about excessive nuclear proliferation. His focus shifted away from mainland US, instead relocating to the Virgin Islands, a US overseas territory. Here he purchased an estate, which has since become known as Oppenheimer Beach, from 1957 onwards. He spent significant time here, albeit many institutions within America still extended invitations for guest lectures. Despite this, the 1950s were a challenging time for Oppenheimer's research output. He published scarcely. By the late 1950s, efforts to rehabilitate Oppenheimer's reputation were in full swing. The French government awarded him the Legion d'Honneur in 1957, acknowledging his wartime contributions to the Allied cause. He was made a foreign member of the Royal Society in Britain in 1962. In America, the severity of the Second Red Scare and its treatment of those only loosely associated with the communist movement was becoming more evident. As a result, President John F. Kennedy awarded Oppenheimer the Enrico Fermi Award in 1963, a belated yet welcome recognition of a mistake made during the Red Scare. Sadly, Oppenheimer's restored reputation was short-lived. In 1965, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, likely from lifelong chain smoking. Despite aggressive treatment, he fell into a coma in early 1967 and passed away in February at age 62. Though his reputation was only partially restored politically, over 600 colleagues, scientists, and military personnel attended his funeral, reflecting the respect he earned in academic and scientific communities. His ashes were laid to rest in the waters off St. John's Island. In the decades since, Oppenheimer's reputation has been fully rehabilitated. Ironically, Edward Teller, who testified against Oppenheimer in his 1954 hearing, was largely shunned by the scientific community. Despite posthumous nominations for the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1967, preceded by 1946 and 1951. Oppenheimer never received the award. The reasons for this have been the subject of ongoing debate. Given his significant accomplishments, though Robert Oppenheimer's list of published works is more concise compared to Albert Einstein's vast library of over 300 scientific papers, the brevity of his publications doesn't undermine his significance. Post the Second World War, Oppenheimer's academic contributions were sparse, numbering just 5 papers. His wide-ranging contributions to physics didn't clinch any major theoretical or applied breakthroughs that would typically merit a Nobel Prize, an honor typically reserved for a specific scientific accomplishment, such as Einstein's seminal work on the photoelectric effect. That's not to say Oppenheimer's work lacked merit. Some argue his insights into gravitational collapse were Nobel-worthy. His true brilliance, however, shone through his collaborative work and guidance of other scientists and physicists, making him an invaluable leader at the Los Alamos laboratory during the Second World War. The name Robert Oppenheimer stands tall in the annals of theoretical physics. His work, spanning 4 decades from the 1920s to the 1960s, expanded our comprehension of the cosmos. His notable achievements include the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, revolutionizing our grasp of molecular dynamics since 1927, and the Oppenheimer-Phillips process, explaining deuteron-induced nuclear reactions, a collaboration with Melba Phillips in 1935. Yet, Oppenheimer's legacy is inseparable from the Manhattan Project. As the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory, Oppenheimer led US efforts to develop the atomic bomb during the Second World War, a controversial endeavor that would cast long, uncertain shadows over the world. Despite the global and moral repercussions of these weapons, they were seen as a wartime necessity, haunted by the destructive force he helped create. Oppenheimer became an outspoken critic against the proliferation of more potent weapons post-war. This stance led to his persecution and prosecution by the very government he served during the Second Red Scare of the 1950s. Today, Oppenheimer's legacy endures. This extraordinary yet eccentric figure, who perceived the universe in almost mystical terms, surely deserves his place among the titans of modern science. So that was the extraordinary life of Robert Oppenheimer. If you found this intriguing, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Let's keep his memory alive together. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments section below.